And I think he made a very good point there, which is a lot of the time when you find, especially in London, people who are doing multisensory dining events, what you tend to find is there's a big show, lots of kind of, entertainment around you, and the food tends to be kind of, secondary. It's never really the main focus. But for us, neurogastronomy, and for me personally, I see neurogastronomy as much more about drawing people's attention and stimulating their senses as they're eating. It's not really about using gimmicks and, different kind of ways of distracting the guest from the dish. Neurogastronomy, for me, should really be, and multisensory flavor perception, for me, should really be about engaging more of the diner's senses as they're enjoying the dish. And I think that's a fundamental kind of distinction to make, because a lot of people do see the gimmicky side of sensory dining, but I don't think they take enough time to really kind of understand that it's an innate part of who we are. We use all our senses when we're dining, as Professor Spence has kind of talked to you about. And I think for us it's just looking at how we can heighten those senses, how we can make you more aware of those senses as you're dining, how we can make you more aware that smell is actually so much more important to your perception of flavor than taste. But we never really think about that. And I think when we're eating, especially in a dining environment, we never really sit there and kind of take note or be mindful, let's say, of the way the food sounds, of the way the food, the texture of it, of the smells and what impact that can have. And then what's very interesting from that is once you kind of have that understanding of those basics, then what you can do is develop upon that and say, okay, well, if this is how we stimulate the senses, how can we then augment the dishes and change the flavors and the textures and the sounds of the dish without actually altering anything on the dish? How can we affect the surroundings in a way that completely changes? So for us, we get guests who are looking for something a bit different. They're not just looking for that kind of run-of-the-mill dining experience. They're coming to have a little fun, to be educated a little, to experience something new. So there's a lot of pressure on us in a way to kind of deliver on that. So it has to be fun. It has to be sensory. And by definition, eating is sensory. But for us, we're trying to kind of turn the volume up on all your different senses and get you so much more aware of not just what you're eating, but how you relate to it, how you interact with it, maybe your hands, maybe, do we always have to use a knife, fork, spoon, maybe there are other ways that we can think of, maybe with the pincers or a tweezers or, as long as it makes sense to the dish, and I think that's absolutely fine. And yeah, educational, as I said, very, very important to us that guests leave with a sense of having understood not just the food, but having understood as well a little bit about the culture, the history, and in the case of synesthesia, the science behind the neurological phenomenon of synesthesia. So when I first heard about this, it sounds kind of intuitive. You think, do colors have tastes? Do we associate certain tastes with certain colors? And to some degree you think, well, that kind of makes sense. It could be kind of reasonable, but it's always more interesting when you kind of put it to the test. One of the main things as well that I don't want you to get confused about is we're not trying, and we never try to do this, which is sensory manipulation. So the idea isn't that we're trying to trick you in any way. We're not trying to do that at all. What we're trying to do is see what your genuine perception is of colors and flavors. So there's no tricks here, no gimmicks, just very simple. We have 4 different liquids. You have sweet, sour, salty, and bitter. A lot of people will immediately ask, why don't you have umami? Why don't you have fatty? Why don't you have all the other flavors? Well, one of the main reasons being is that sweet, sour, salty, bitter are tastes that we've all grown up with. We can all identify with. We've all built associations with. Now, if I ask you to name a color that you associate with sweet, okay, you've got a pretty good chance of kind of getting that because you've built up associations over your whole lifetime. You've built up certain kind of ideas on what colors you expect to be sweet. But if I ask you what color you expect umami to be, all of a sudden it starts to get very difficult. So then when I ask you to put the tastes in order, that one taste of umami, whatever color we assign to it, can be very confusing for people. We tried this and it didn't work very well. But once you've arranged them into, again, from left to right, salty, bitter, sour, sweet. Salty, bitter, sour, sweet. Now, what you might want to do is look at the people next to you, see if they're the same, see if they're very different. What's interesting is the order that we've come up with, white being salty, black being bitter, green being sour, and red being sweet, is based on the research from Professor Spence's cross-modal department. But of course we each have our own perceptions and our own associations that we make with this. But nonetheless, this is where we got the base kind of idea from. Now, what's really interesting about this is if I was to present you with a blue drink, what would blue taste of? What would we expect it to be? Sweet, sour, quite contrasting ideas there, that's good. Well, the interesting thing is if you ask people in England what they expect a blue drink to taste of, a lot of the time they'll say it's sweet, it's raspberry, or blueberry, or something like that. And I think a lot of the association comes from the fact that, you know, all these energy drinks like Gatorade and all this kind of stuff, a lot of the blue drinks tend to be like raspberry flavored. But when you ask people in Asia and in the Far East, when you ask them what they expect a blue drink to taste of, they'll say lemon, like lemonade. And if anyone here has ever been to TGI Fridays, it's a big kind of restaurant chain, they do something called an electric lemonade, which is blue, which is very interesting. But the point is we all have different kind of associations. Now when we run this little experiment with our dining guests, the hostess goes around with a little board and tries to quickly mark down everyone's order before they actually consume them or consume the spheres. And you will find roughly about anywhere between 60 and 75% of people tend to get the correct order, which is very interesting. But what's more interesting is you start to find that most people, I'd say we could go up to about 90% of people, find red to be sweet, find green to be sour. And those really stand out. So it's very interesting that to some degree, we're all a little synesthetic, and we all can taste colors in a little way. So, very briefly, and by the way, my 3.5-year-old gets this right, so I have high expectations of you all. Yeah, it's proven that kids even younger can get it right, but... okay, so we have two shapes here. Which one is boba? Booba. Which shape is booba? The more rounded one. Which shape is kiki? All right. And pretty much 99% of people will do that, okay? And partially what we wanted to do is to demonstrate that in the form of a dish. We wanted to demonstrate this idea of boba and kiki. So one of the sides of the dish contains flavors like sweet potato and pomegranate molasses and a Parmesan sand, and we make a fresh curd. And the other side, paprika and sage. The other side of the dish has corn, it has rhubarb, it has green apple, it has a lime dressing, and sea bass. So, what would we say in terms of, which side would we say is booba? Anyone? The sweet potato, yeah. Kiki, the more kind of sharper, more tart, more sharp, more citrusy, more fresh flavors. And that's what we associate with a word like kiki. Is when we think of something like kiki, we expect it to be more fresh, more tart, more sharp, more zesty, more citrusy. And then when we taste something like boba, we expect the flavors to be more rounded, more fatty, sweeter. And so this is what we wanted to reflect in this dish to some degree. So in a way, we've realized that we can taste colors. And in another way now, what we're kind of realizing is that we can taste shapes. And then what we kind of started to realize was, when you spray something in the air, what people automatically will do is start to engage their sense of smell. And through engaging their sense of smell, your perception of flavor is arguably 80 to 90% of your perception of flavor is made up by smell, not by taste. By taste, you can taste sweet, sour, salty, bitter, umami, metallic, fatty, and a few others. But your sense of smell, you can perceive up to about 80,000 different types of smells, distinct aromas. So it makes up such a fundamental part of our perception, our enjoyment of flavor. So what we did when you're spraying this and people are smelling, inhaling this smell, when they come to eat the soup, because they've engaged that sense of smell, they get the full burst of flavor. Because they're so focused on their sense of smell, we realized that it wasn't so much the soup that was great, although the soup was pretty good, but it wasn't so much the soup that was great. What it was is the fact that we'd stimulated their sense of smell, and that through engaging their sense of smell, they got the full impact of the soup. Because we tried this on ourselves. We sat there, ate the soup normally, then we sprayed it, smelt it, and then started, and you think, oh God, yeah. Even though the actual the aroma doesn't really impact too much, or doesn't impact the flavor, take a little taste of it once you get it. It's a very plain risotto, just a little bit of parmesan and butter. It's nothing too exciting. And then what we're going to try and do is change the flavor of it. Okay? And we're going to try 2 different types of flavors and see how that works on you, and see if this is something that works for you guys. I think as you're doing it, we can start kind of giving it out. Can everyone smell? If you need... There's a little bit of a mist, but don't worry, it's... Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I can smell it here now, so it must be kind of getting around the room. Anyone have an idea on what that is? Truffle. So as we're taking that other spoon, has everyone ever noticed, and we were, myself and a few of my colleagues were in Mugaritz a few weeks ago, and we had like 22 courses. But when one of the courses got put down in front of us, 3 out of the 4 of us tilted our dish. We didn't even notice it. We didn't even notice that it was one of the people sat at the table that said, "Did you notice how 3 of you have all tilted your dish?" No, I didn't even think about it. And I'm sure you will catch yourself doing that at times. The dish will be put in front of you and you'll tilt it. Why? Again, it comes to this idea of what Professor Spence was talking about we have certain preferences. Now, we've been working on this. We have one dish, which is called the Sight and Sound of Flavor, and one of the main features, visual striking features of the dish, is that you have a langoustine that pretty much cuts through the center of the bowl with the head and everything intact. And we have come to the conclusion that the optimal angle to serve this dish in front of the guest is at a 45-degree angle. And that seems to be the angle that people find most appetizing, it would seem. So now what we're working on is this idea of seeing, right, well, if a 45-degree angle works on this dish, will it work with a whole load of other dishes? So now we're developing all these kind of dishes to see if it was just a fluke, or if 45 degrees is genuinely a much more appetizing angle at which to serve our courses.